Hey, how's it going everybody? Welcome back to HTML Basics. Today we're going to be learning about comments and void tags. Comments in HTML are typically used to add notes or hide code that won't be displayed in your browser. Comments in HTML start with a less than symbol, then an exclamation mark, then two hyphens, then you put the description or the code that you want to hide, then after that you add two more hyphens and then a greater than tag. But as is always the case, theory is never enough. Let's quit the yapping and let's get practicing some comments. So if we create a comment with a less than, exclamation point, two hyphens, and then once that is done, you'll see that it creates automatically for me. But as best practice, it's probably best to still do the two hyphens and the greater than. Then within this, we will type in this text will not appear in the browser. We click save, we click refresh, and you can see here that it still says hello world and not this text will not appear. Now to prove that it's still included, we go to inspect and then console and then elements, and we'll see that the text we have is included in the HTML, but it's obviously not including in the body of our text in the browser. Then we will do the same with the hello world, so a less than symbol, exclamation mark, two hyphens, and you'll see here, if we don't include the two additional hyphens and the greater than, the rest of the text or code will actually be commented out. So you need to include the two hyphens and then the greater than symbol to ensure that the rest of the code or HTML or any other code is not commented out. So then, to make sure, if we click save, refresh, and you'll see here that the hello world has gone from our body. Then we go to inspect, elements, and you'll see here that the comments are still included, but because obviously they're commented, they will not appear in the browser. And for the time being, I'll just remove the comments for the hello world so that we have something in the browser for now. And as is always the case, we always want to save time. So to create a comment in HTML, the shortcut is command and /. All right, cool. Now that's comments for HTML finished, we'll now move on to void tags / elements. Void elements are tags that do not have a closing tag because they represent a single element on the HTML page, and therefore the closing tag of less than / greater than is not required. The main void elements are area, line break or breaker tag, columns, COL, which we'll cover when we cover the tables, rows and columns in a later video, the horizontal rule or HR element, the image element, which we've covered in a previous episode, but we'll go into slightly more detail here, the input element, which is arguably the most diverse and allows us to manipulate the element the most to what we want. Then the link and meta elements, which go in the head of the body, in the head section of our HTML code. And then finally the source and track elements, which we'll cover when we do images, videos, and audio in another section and another lesson. So the main void tags that we're going to be covering are BR, break align, horizontal rule, HR, image, which is obviously for images, inputs, which is the most diverse, and then we'll touch on link and meta tags as well. All right, as is always the case, let's quit yapping and get into it and practice. So first, I'll put some example text such as this is an example text. But first, what I want to do is I want to comment out all of these void tags so we can get a nice clean start. Okay, then if we save this, then go to our browser and click refresh, we'll see here that the text that we just put in has now been added. And now, because I don't want this text on the same line, we'll add a few breaker rules, breaker BR tags. So a simple way to do that is just type BR and then the asterisk and then however many you want. In this case, I've chosen 4. We click refresh and you'll see here we now have a more spaced out browser. If we change it from 4 to 2, click save and refresh, and now the text is closer to each other. Okay, now what we'll do is we'll add a horizontal line, but first I want to add one more breaker rule, breaker line BR tag, so that we have space and that we can clearly see the horizontal rule. So we'll type in BR, press tab, and then we'll type in HR, and then we'll press tab. Then if we save, go to the browser, click refresh, there we have it. We've added the BR, and then we've also added the horizontal rule. And you'll see here, no matter how much we expand or contract the browser, the HR will always go from one end of the browser to the other end. Alright, nice. So now what we'll do is we'll add an image, which is another void tag, but first, to get practice, we'll add a few more BR tags. So BR times 2, press tab, then HR, and then tab. And then for good measure, we'll add a few more BR tags. So BR times 2. And then what we'll do is we'll type IMG tab, and you'll see here the defaults are source and alt. And as you remember, the source is where the source of the image goes, and then alt is if there is something wrong with the source, we will then get a message here. So we'll put in the alt, if you are seeing this, then something is wrong. So then what we'll do, we'll save the code, then we'll go to the browser and we'll click refresh, and we should then see our image appear. There you have it. Nice, the image is there. So then we'll change the source, and just to make sure that the alt appears, click save, refresh, and there we have it. If you are seeing this, then something is wrong. Nice. So to progress, we'll continue and we'll change the source back to its correct source. Click save, refresh, and our image is back with us. Nice. So now what we'll do is we'll move on to a diverse and flexible element, this being the input element. So below the image, I'll want to create some space for the input element. So I'll add a few breaker rules. We'll add 3 in this case. We'll add another horizontal so we can get some practice. And then we'll type in input, and then we'll press tab. And you'll see here the default attributes are type, name, and ID. And obviously we can remove them if we don't want them. In this case, I'm going to remove name and ID as I'm just solely focusing on the different types of inputs that we can get. Alright, and since text is the first value in the type attribute, we'll click save in our code, and then we'll go to our browser and click refresh, and you'll see here that we have an input where we can type any text we want. So I'll just type something in here. You can type anything you want in here. Cool. And so that's that for text. You'll see here when we click refresh, it will disappear. That's because we haven't set up something called local storage, but that will be with a JavaScript. And since we're only covering basic HTML, we won't worry about that for now. Now we'll move on to other values in the type attribute. Okay, let's start with week. We'll put it as a value in the type attribute, click save, refresh, and you'll see here when we click the calendar, we can select any week we want. Then we'll select or choose the email value. This can be useful for when signing up or logging in or allowing users to sign up to a newsletter. And well, first of all, I need to click refresh. Then we can type in here, this is an email. Now again, we'll need things like JavaScript to ensure that these are valid emails and that we're getting valid email addresses. Whereas here, if we remove the @ and then click refresh, we'll see we won't actually get anything. Cool, that's it for the email. We'll now move on to the radio, which allows us to select and is pretty useful in selecting certain things, like for example delivery dates, or when you want to have a haircut or something like that. Then another useful input element or input type is range. This can allow the user, for example, if you're on an e-commerce and or a property or something like that, and you can select the price, so you can range it from say £1,000 all the way to £1,000,000 if you're dealing with properties. Then we can set the reset, which is a reset button, and again we would need JavaScript and things like that, for example to refresh the page or reset a score or something like that. Another useful value is the password value type, and you'll see here when we start typing something in the input element we will have our password being covered. Now again we can use CSS and JavaScript to be able to create something like an eyelid where we click and we can show the password. But for now we'll leave that. Then another important or useful type value for the input element is the search. This can be useful for, well, doing things like searching. So when we click in here, we would click here you can search, and you'll see here the difference between text and search is that the little X appears, meaning we can cancel whatever we want to search. Then we can have a submit button, which does what it says on the tin, just like Ronsel. We can then submit something like a form or user details or something like that. Then we can add something, for example, like date, time, local, which allows us to select the date and the time that we want. And say you want to book a haircut at the local barbers, we can then use date, time, local, and then we can use another type, the submit type, to allow the user to select the date and time they want, and then we can then click submit, and then it will be sent to us and we know what time the user would be getting their haircut. Okay, then finally I just wanted to go back to the search type and then show you that it's possible to put a placeholder. Now a placeholder is essentially, for example, when you go to Google and it says search here, we can put in the placeholder whatever we want to instruct the user. For example, enter your search here. We click save, we click refresh, and you'll see here that we get the placeholder here. And that instructs the user as to what to put in or gives examples as to what to put in here. And then you'll see as soon as we start typing, the placeholder disappears and our text that we begin typing replaces it. Alright, cool. So now that is it for the input void tags. Now I just wanted to briefly show you the meta and link tags, which will be going into our head section in the code. So then if we go to our head, type in link and then tab, and you'll see here the automatic attribute are rel and href. Rel is a style sheet. For example, if we want to use CSS, we would then simply go to the href and we would type in the file path. Now remember, if the file path is in a completely different folder to our current file, we will need 2 dots and a /, whereas our index.html, if it is not in a file, we simply use 1. Then, if we move to meta, this void tag will provide essentially the background details of the web page. The typical attributes that we have for meta are charset, and then when we have a charset attribute, the value is typically UTF-8. Now you'll see here that we have UTF-8 in our Visual Studio Code at the bottom. This is because this is the source encoding, and essentially this allows us to put what we have on the browser. Then typically we also have another void meta tag, and within that we have something called name, and the name is the viewport, which is how the website will be viewed on a certain browser, whether it's on the desktop or on the phone. And typically we have width equals device width, and then input scale being equal to 1, meaning it's a 1-to-1 aspect ratio, and it can actually be viewed on the device of your choice. Then I realized I actually need to include the comma for it to work. You click save, refresh, and there we have it. The website is still working nicely. Nice. So that's it for comments and void tags. So we learned how to create a comment, that being a less than, an exclamation mark, and then two hyphens, followed by the text you want to hide, and then two additional hyphens and a greater than. Or if you're lazy and want it done quickly, you do command and forward slash. Let's be honest, the lazy version is better usually and quicker. So then we learn about BR tags, HR tags, images, and the various options and attributes for inputs. Nice. So that's it for today and learning about comments and void tags. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like, please subscribe, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.